where every day is a great day. KCAA, Loma Linda.
Thank you for tuning in for this edition of Justice Watch with Attorney Zulu Ali. I am Attorney Zulu Ali with the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, Dr. Akil Bashir, and Andrea Rodeman. This week, like every week, we'll be discussing critical legal and social justice issues that are impacting our community. This week, we'll be discussing the recent murder of Tyree Nichols by the some Memphis police officers. For those of you who may not know what happened, on January the 7th, Nichols, who was a motorist traveling in Memphis, Tennessee, and allegedly pulled over for driving recklessly, was hospitalized after being brutally beat by 5 police officers. On January the 10th, peer reports by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, Nichols died as a result of the injuries that he sustained in a police beating. On January the 15th, more than a week after the incident at the traffic stop, the Memphis Police Department announced it had placed 5 officers on leave while there was an investigation into the alleged police brutality. And on January the 20th, the officers names are Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, Emmett Martin III, Desmond Mills Jr., and Justin Smith were fired for violating policies on excessive use of force, duty to render aid, and duty to intervene at the traffic stop. Then on January the 26th, the 5 officers were each charged with second-degree murder, 2 counts of official misconduct, 1 count of official oppression, aggravated assault, act in concert, and 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping. They were they surrendered and were booked into the Shelby County Jail, and I think they have since posted bond. I know that, was it Friday, I believe, that they released the video camera footage of the incident, which showed the beating and murder of Tyree Nichols. And, of course, there were protests since that time. Of course, there was what, those described as being peaceful protests, primarily on the bridge which separates Arkansas and Tennessee. That bridge, they kind of shut that down for a few hours. However, there was no incidents, at least from what I understand, of any acts of violence. It seemed when we were looking at the TV and they were, showing the broadcast, it seemed as though they were kind of looking for something to kind of pop off as far as, some rioting and people acting unpeacefully, I guess I should say. Yeah. That never happened. So let me get right to what my thoughts are on this situation. Now, I'm gonna give a disclaimer before I go into what I have to say. The first disclaimer is that I'm a big fan of Ben Crump. I mean, I think he's an outstanding attorney. I think that he basically has done some great things in all the cases that he's been involved in, and I agree with 99% of what he says. Mm-hmm. Right? Probably 99.9% of what he says.
Okay.
However, this is the issue that we have with police brutality, and this is the reason why it continues to be a problem that will ultimately never be addressed if we continue to deal with it the same way that we deal with this particular situation as well as any other situation. He said that he believed that the way that Memphis reacted to this particular situation should be a model for all police departments around the country, right? Now, granted, The police chief came out. She was very quick to condemn the acts of the officers. The officers were charged released in a very short period of time, and they were charged in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And the chief came out, and she basically said the things that she should say, as far as the fact that she condemned the acts of the police officers. However, this is the problem. The problem is that what we saw on January the 7th on that videotape by those Memphis police officers is not the first time that anything like that happened, and I'm sure that this is not the first time that those officers had been engaged in any type of misconduct and excessive beating of other individuals. Where did they get that from? That does not exist, in isolation. Many of these situations where you have these police officers who are engaged in this type of police misconduct and this police beatings is because it has been a cancer and a culture within police departments since the inception of police departments.
Yes.
And the reason why is that, like in George Floyd, in the case of Derek Chauvin, where you had the officer who clearly murdered a man, in front of video, and there's no question it was terrible the way that this man killed George Floyd, and probably that's just the way he operated. But what is missing is the fact that this is an officer who had a track record of beating people. He was an officer not only, and what adds accident to injury is that basically he was training other officers, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have someone that way that is involved in that type of inhumane treatment, and the fact that he was training other police officers, did we really gain any ground by seeing the discipline and ultimately the prosecution and conviction of Derek Chauvin? The department was very quick to throw shade and to throw Derek Chauvin as well as those other officers under the bus. They were very quick to do that. What's similar in all of these cases is the lack of accountability of people who are responsible for supervising and training these individuals.
Yeah.
So my thing is that as long as we're going to continue to only focus on those particular officers and their misconduct, whenever there's individual pockets of that type of misconduct, then we'll never get anywhere. Mm-hmm. We hold, let's just say, for example, and I'm using this as a very loose and a very, fun type of example. Let's just say you're a head football coach of a football team, and you're losing, right? Who's the first person that goes?
The coach.
The coach.
The coach goes.
He goes, mm-hmm. Right?
Correct.
And the staff. In these situations, it doesn't happen that way. We're just that situation happened within police officers. If we begin to start going all the way up the line, those officers, their supervisors, and I'm sorry, I love the sister. I'm glad she's in a position like that. They all need to go. Mm-hmm. You're going to start seeing things happen differently if we're going to start going all the way up the line, mm-hmm. right? And that's the way. Same thing when you go into combat. If something happens with a soldier, the command gets in trouble, right? Mm-hmm. However, when it comes to the situation with police officers, when a police officer does something that he's not supposed to, everybody else is let off the hook. The supervisors are left off the hook. Where were supervisors at? Mm-hmm. Where was, this is the thing. And then this is, let's just be devil's advocate. And this is what I've heard about the situation is they said, well, look, why didn't he just comply? If he had just complied, then maybe this situation would have never happened in all these situations, right? Obviously, two things can be true, but I think one does not negate the other.
Right.
This is the situation with this situation with Nichols. First of all, it's a traffic stop. Mm-hmm. They said it was reckless driving. I don't know. We hadn't seen anything to suggest that he was legitimately stopped for any traffic violation.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know whether that's true, but just assume it's a traffic violation. You stop someone, you immediately go to the driver's seat and you snatch him out of the car.
Yeah.
Right? Who snatches people out of the car on traffic stops?
Right.
Snatch him out of the car. He don't really probably know really what's going on, but they get him down on the ground, and then they I guess they're at this point they're trying to take him into custody for what? I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know what he's being arrested for. I don't know what he's being detained for. It's supposed to be a traffic stop. So he's down on the ground and he's asking questions, and the people say, well, at that point in time, then he should have complied. The question is, that sounds, I don't know if you've ever been beat before. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been beat before?
Mm-mm.
Huh?
No.
Have you?
I've been in a fight. But I
Look,
I know where you're going.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know where you're going.
Hey, you beat somebody, though.
Mm-hmm.
Did they stay there and just not move?
Nope.
Huh?
They moved.
When you beating on somebody, you can't beat somebody and tell them don't move.
That would be foolish.
That's just like when you get a spanking and your mama say, stop moving, stop moving.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Are you going to stop moving?
No.
That's hard to do, ain't it?
That's hard to do.
Because
Correct.
your body has this, you can't, certain things in your body you can't control.
Yeah, natural response.
When you're actually getting physically assaulted.
Right.
Right? So, that's always been the whole thing. Don't move, don't move. Pow, you're getting beat. They're moving you around, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so he gets he gets up, he takes off running. He's not far from home. I understand that he might have been within blocks from it where he lived, because he was calling for his mother, right?
Yeah.
So now you take off running, and now apparently you're calling out to other officers to assist you in this situation. One of the things that I always wanted to know when I was a police officer and there were calls, we used to get calls about suspicious person. There was a 10 code. I was a police officer in Tennessee, right? That's where I served, is actually in Tennessee.
Right.
So you would get calls about 10 codes about there's a suspicious person coming your way. I would always make it a point to ask the question, even on the radio, what made them suspicious? Right? Because isn't that important?
Yeah.
Because did he rob somebody? Did he kill somebody? Is he armed? Or is he running from a traffic stop? It makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've had times where people couldn't even articulate to me why they were, running, or why a person was running, or why a person is suspicious. So you take off running. Or so you take off and you're doing a backup, not knowing really what happened. I'm assuming, I don't know. I haven't heard all the traffic, radio traffic surrounding the incident. So I'm assuming the officers probably didn't know. They just know that they're helping, and they got a guy that was running. So now you catch up with the guy. This is another thing that I was speaking to a good friend of mine earlier that trips me out about being a police officer nowadays. When I was a police officer, even now I would love to believe I can squabble a little bit, right? If I got to fight somebody, I can fight. You got to be able to fight, right?
You should, yes.
What's wrong with these dudes? Them dudes are, This is a little old dude.
Yeah.
There's 5 people. You're trying to take this guy into custody. Why didn't you just get him down and put his hands behind his back and put handcuffs on him and take him into custody?
Right.
Correct.
Right? I remember in Georgia. You remember in Georgia where the guy took the taser gun from the 2 police officers and took off running?
Yeah.
And they shot him in the back? Well, I might get in trouble for saying this. But if one dude can beat up 2 police officers and take away their taser gun, I think he should be able to get away.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for real.
I mean, come on, you're a police officer. You have to be able to squabble a little bit and be able to take someone into custody, because ultimately that's what it boils down to.
Right.
And so, not just this incident, but all of the things that we see that are taking place within these officers and these situations where these officers are using excessive force and killing unarmed men and doing so much, when all it takes is to you don't need to talk. Get him down, put his arms behind his back, put handcuffs on him, and take him into custody if that's what's necessary.
Yeah.
In this particular case, you can see at the very end of the video that they were trying to create a narrative of he's on something. He
Yeah.
grabbed my gun.
Yeah.
All this is stuff that you're trying to do to try to create a police report to throw shade so that you won't be held responsible, because I'm sure that once EMT was called, they understood that somebody's probably going to look at it because you beat you know what out of this dude who ultimately died as a result of that. What you're seeing in these police cases and police brutality cases is not just a police-wide situation; it's a system-wide police situation.
Yeah.
And basically, you have people that are in powerful positions politically, and who have authority, who basically aren't. Everybody should feel a little bit of this. And in every case, you have so many people that get off the hook, and the guy at the very bottom is the guy that's going to be held responsible for this. And everybody's trying to look out after themselves and ultimately trying to save their career. We have a huge problem, in this country, and it's just a human problem, about people who don't know how to handle authority. Right? You have to manage that, because if there's one thing that's true, people in powerful positions always mess it up. They're always awful people.
Yeah.
Right? Not always,
In
but
most
in many
cases,
cases,
yeah.
that's what happens. And you got to check people when you give them power.
Exactly.
And that's what happened in this particular case. You had 5 people who, were put in positions of authority and positions of power, and they abused the power. And they abused the power because that's what they were taught.
That's what they were taught.
All those guys, I'm sure they knew each other. I'm sure they knew each other's significant others. They barbecued together. It's a brotherhood, right? You see what I mean? And the problem is they train police officers not how to deal with human beings, but to deal with with enemy combatants, as if they were in a war zone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how they put them out there, right? And so when you have people that are, and I think that police training has to be completely revamped, where there has to be this focus on human behavior and how to interact with human beings. And none of these people, you can be an absolute terrible human being and be a police officer, have no people skills,
Yeah.
which shouldn't be but you're dealing with people all day long.
Yeah.
So part of what it's almost a RoboCop type of mentality where basically I'm going to give you a command, and once I give you a command, you do what I tell you to do. A line. Well, you do what I tell you to do, and that's it. That's the
Yeah.
bottom line.
Yeah.
And if you don't do what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it, then you're going to pay for it. I mean, you're shouting out commands like you know like you're a drill instructor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, that becomes, a huge issue and a huge problem when we talk about the way that we're dealing with, or the way that we deal with these issues. We have to readdress, we have to realign, we have to reassess the way that we're operating and asking for reform or asking for things to change. The thing is that we go to a fight sometimes without knowing how to what we want. Sometimes we get kind of caught up in the fight itself. You know what I mean? And I think that when we talk about protesting and being upset and being frustrated, I can understand the frustration. And I can understand why people are upset. But I think that sometimes we ask for the wrong things. And then once this happened, it ain't been that long since George Floyd happened.
Right.
And then you have something like this happen. And what between that time and between now have we done to really try to, do something that's really going to make a change?
Yeah.
I don't, and the thing is that basically nobody really wants us to give answers, because the ones that are involved in making changes, or that should be responsible for making changes, are often the ones that should be put under the microscope.
Yep.
And we should be able to hold them accountable, because now what happens is, what if you go to the city mayor of the city of Memphis and you ask him a question? Or what if you go to the governor of the state of Tennessee and you ask him a question? Or what if you go to the congressman, or you go to someone else and ask him the question? They're going to condemn it, and they're going to give you some sort of politically savvy response as to what they're doing. Like, some feeding you your typical political responses
Right.
to just show that you're trying to, we're doing this, or what we've doing, we're going to implement this. We're working with the chief of police so that what we can do is we can do certain types of training. It's all rhetoric,
Yeah.
because in the final analysis, change them all.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to be, if you go all the way up the chain of command and you hold some sort of accountability for everybody up that chain of command, then you're going to see some changes.
Yeah.
But the problem is they're throwing shade. I mean, let's just be honest. Most of these guys that come on these police departments are probably, if I was guessing, I haven't done the study, but I would guess are between the ages of 22, maybe 26 years old. Many of them just came out of the military. Some of them may just, graduated from college. And they're given a significant amount of authority and responsibility. They're looking to be trained. And then they go on the job and they see this type of conduct by officers that obviously have been working for a long time. So it's the way that they're dealing with things are things that is part of the culture. This is not unusual conduct for them. This is usual conduct for those particular officers. And they become, desensitized, because that's the way you believe it's supposed to work.
because this is your brother. This is the person that you depend on for your life. This is the person who's got your life, who saved you. You know what I mean? They got your back. Oftentimes they got your back, on the street and, and in other places. And so we've built this wedge between the community and policing to the extent that oftentimes we're the enemy combatants because we built this wedge, and then now because you have this bridge between law enforcement and this bridge between the community, then officers don't see us the way they should, and we don't see officers the way we should, because we have just created this bridge, between law enforcement and the public. And how do we get back, or not get back, but how do we get to a point where we can begin to start having the type of trust that we should have in law enforcement? How do we get there? What is it that we need to do? And the only way that it's going to happen is holding the right people accountable. And that's the bigger issue, is holding the right people accountable. And that's just what we just systematically, that's something that we have not been doing. Yeah. I think that we have to look at it that way. And now everyone feels comfortable because the way in which the police chief handled the situation in, administratively and in releasing the officers. She said the right things at the press conferences. And, we did, the right things as far as prosecuting these individuals. It's all, it was swift, and, people are appeased by that. But for me, I think the bigger question is training, management, going all the way up the chain of command. Because even in some of the everyday civilian jobs, everybody feels the wrath. Not just the person who did it, everybody feels the wrath.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? All the way up until, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But what we do is, when it comes to people in power, we let them off the hook.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And I think that they should, it's amazing how it's backwards. Sometimes the more power and authority you have, the less responsibility or accountability is imposed on you.
Yeah.
So the maximum degree of accountability should be imposed on those who choose to be put in a command position, because with that power, with that authority, goes a level of responsibility. You know what I mean? Because you can't just take one and not take the other. You know what I mean? And I think that that's kind of where, that's where I have issue, with the situation and the manner in which it's dealt with. And it's going to continue to be exactly the same way as we see in this. The next time it happens, it's going to be the same situation. The next time it happens, it's going to be the same. This has been going on for years. It's like it's almost like this. You could run a show we did 4 years ago,
Yeah.
and use it for the same thing.
Yeah.
Because it's the same thing. You're saying this, and everybody that I don't understand what these people. We've just gone to a point where, when it comes to our elected officials and our public figures, whether we're talking about chiefs of police and mayors and those types of individuals, I mean, we just need to. We should expect more. What are you protesting about? What do you expect to come out of this?
Right.
That's all I want to know. I'm talking about what do you think? The whole world was protesting for George Floyd.
Exactly.
And what happened?
Nothing.
So what is it that you would expect to come out of this by protesting and then throwing the same shade that they were throwing. It's the same shade. That's really what it boils down to. I mean, I definitely had felt the sort of way in when the chief of police in George Floyd kind of threw chief of police in the George Floyd case threw Derek Chauvin under the bus. I felt some sort of way because you put him in a game, coach. Right? So if you put a bum in the game and you lose the game because you threw a bum in the game, then
Right.
guess what? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're responsible.
You're responsible for that.
Correct.
So you know what I mean? You got to figure you're going to have to put the best players on the field. And if you don't put the best players on the field, then you and your coaching staff are going to have to pay for it.
Yep.
That's what happens. And so that's what we haven't been doing. When is the last time? We know all the names of the officers, but what's the name of their supervisor? What's the name of their chief? Who's his name? Now, I can assure you that if you start going all the way up the chain of command and holding everybody accountable, you're going to get something different.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a completely
That's
different
the truth.
situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as long as I can say, because come on, man, I know how this thing works when you're out there. You know what I mean? You don't see this dude that you're working with, as a bad guy. You might be working with a bad guy, but this is your brother.
Yeah.
This is the dude that's got your back.
Yeah.
So oftentimes the way that it's dealt with when you go out on the field, you're dealing with your brothers. In blue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And oftentimes, and that creates this culture that oftentimes makes the bad apple thrive. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what some of the things that we need to address.
Yeah.
And I said that as black folks and as other minorities, I mean, we do have to we have to, if we're not, is walk and chew gum at the same time. And two things have to because the first thing that we're going to hear, which is legitimate, is obviously there's some things that we need to deal with and we need to change. One of the things that we need to deal with and we need to change is for me, I think we got it twisted. And I'll say it and I'll say it again before I make this statement. I don't want to be nobody else. I think that there is not, in my personal opinion, and I believe this to my core, there is no person I would rather be than a black man in America. Nothing. Nobody. I would not want to be in nobody's shoes. I wouldn't change it in a million years.
Yeah.
In a million years, there's nothing that makes me want to change that. Because I at all, right? I believe that wholeheartedly. But at the same time, we don't all feel that way.
No.
And the ones that don't feel that way has bought into the rhetoric of the people who are hating on you and is fearful of you and is fearful of your success. So you begin to start hating who you are. What do you do when you start hating who you are? Hurting each other.
Yeah.
Right.
Killing each other. Thinking less of each other.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So what you saw happen is with those five, that is a clear example of self-hate. 5 men with authority and power kill a man who looks just like them for a traffic violation. Right?
Yeah.
The same thing happens when the uniform is off. How often do we see that same situation happen?
Right.
Yeah.
because you bought into the rhetoric of something that's absolutely not true. I've heard some of my, they're kind of jokes. I always say this. When someone says, I would take it on, take it off. I would take it on, I would take it off. If I could get out of the game, I'd get out of it tomorrow. I wouldn't say that for a million years. There's nothing in the world that would want to make me be that way.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in the world that would want to make me feel like I'm so-called privileged because of bad stuff that somebody else did. Who, you know what I'm saying? Where did the privilege come from? The privilege it came from oppressing and mistreating other people. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't have that blood on my hands.
Yeah.
And so, I wanted to put that out there before I start talking about the fact of the things that we need to do and mentioning the fact that it happened to be 5 black men who were involved in doing it. They said it's not the color, it's not the person in the color of the person in uniform, it's the color of the person who, was who the suspect that makes a difference. And so, for me, y'all ain't got to talk yet, have you? No, for me, that's what I think we need to deal with.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have a caller. Who's the caller? The lieutenant. Hello.
Hey, partner, how y'all doing?
I'm doing fine. This is Lieutenant Reese.
Oh,
okay.
hey.
Right
Once
down
again,
your
hey,
alley.
family. Happy New Year. It's been a minute since we had a chance to talk. I've enjoyed the show, and I just hate the fact that, once again, we have to go back to this topic. But quickly, Counselor, I just want to elaborate on a few comments you made. One of the things that's a little disheartening about this is that you mentioned about supervision and holding the supervisors accountable. As I look across the bits of video that I was able to see and even some of the follow-up, I was really appalled at the fact that there was no supervisors or stripes or corporal bars stripes or anything that I saw on any of the officers. And given the fact that a lot of them, their tenure in law enforcement has not surpassed, I think, 5 years across the board, you sometimes have these situations where you have babies teaching babies. One thing I hope that comes out of this is that the public outcry is understanding that when you start to think about defunding and doing different things to police departments that are already understaffed and they don't have the management people in place to do the things that need to take place, you have these type of incidents that occur and the repercussions that come from it. Family, I want you to think about the fact that this is supposed to have been a special, like what we call here in Metro Nashville, a crime suppression unit, which means that normally those units are not really mandated to deal with misdemeanor issues. They're there to deal with the high crime, the violent crimes, the repetitive offenders that have been identified in briefings, and they're there to suppress areas where robberies and things of that nature at a high volume. I was appalled at the fact that, one, you had someone from that type of unit dealing with a moving violation. Two, that we didn't have a supervisor listening to the radio just make a simple statement and say, "Officer, did you see the driver of the vehicle? Could you identify the driver of the vehicle? Do you have the registration? Run him on your computer, look at the picture that comes back to the registration. If that's him, tow the car, we'll get the warrant, get back to work." Right. There's a lot of things that we can do in our business that sometimes concerns me because we go overboard and not think through what's the most correct thing and the most efficient thing to do in allowing to enforce the law. Some people will pull back and say, hey, well, if we don't address reckless driving and other things like that, it becomes the broken window theory, and that these things will only perpetuate to other violent crimes. One of the things that have concerned me in my career, that when we have special task units like this, is they get into stats. They get into statistics. And sometimes what happens is that you get in, you saturate an area, you bring the crime down, you go before the bosses, and you don't have that many arrests. What I've seen in my career is what they start to do is just start to concentrate on areas where things might lead to some type of charge, whereas on paper it looks like an arrest. I pray that's not what we're dealing with here, but unfortunately that's what you do see in those type of situations. And so what I'm hoping is that overall the administration will look at it and look at the totality of the situation and realize that it never really had to be there. We wasn't dealing with a person that had shot and killed 2 or 3 people or was a rapist on the run or had robbed a couple of people. This was a moving violation. If we had something that identified him, which they did, the vehicle and the registration and everything else, then you had prima facie an officer that saw him face to face because they had that confrontation before he ran off. Sometimes you just have to say, I'm not getting you today, but I'll get you tomorrow. And then on the flip side of that, and Chancellor, you and I have talked about this before, we as African-American men in these United States have to understand that at times in confrontations with law enforcement, there's a gotcha moment. And when that gotcha moment occurs, just be got. Allow yourself to be apprehended, go downtown, make the bond, and beat the officer out of the police station because they're still writing reports and dealing with stuff, and you're at home eating popcorn and just waiting for your court date. We have to change our mentality and our mindset to not create a situation that allows them to be able to talk about Tennessee versus Garner and I was in fear for my safety or the safety of someone. Let's not even go there. You stop me. What do you need? You want me out of the car? I'm out of the car. Here's my hands. Do what you need to do. I'll see you on the date that's assigned. And I'm praying that that's the kind of the thing that we let our young men and women know, that until we get to the point where that we're going to be equally policed across the board, no matter what the color of your skin is, that's the mindset that we're going to have, whereby that we'll live tomorrow and have the tale to tell.
You got a question?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a question. It's just, it was more of a statement, I watched the video, and after watching the video, during the time that I was watching the video, it reminded me something of myself. And I say this because I come from a gang-banging background. I started gang-banging when I was 13 years old. And I'll tell you this, that when I saw that video, it reminded me of those days. It reminded me of, the things that I did that was a badge of shame. It was not a badge of honor. It was completely a badge of shame at some of the stuff that I'd done, while gangbanging. And when I saw them police doing what they were doing, it reminded me of the days that I was doing the same thing with my homeboys. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally holding people up and see who can punch him the hardest.
Yeah.
Those are the things that we did. And then afterwards, we talked about it and we laughed about it after it was done. And, it was, to me, it just looked like it was a gang banging type thing. It looked like it was just a whole gang setup, and, everything that was done was gang related. And you can't tell me, I've never met a I've never met a nice gang leader. I've seen a lot of gang members in my life. And I've met a lot of gang leaders, and none of them was peaceful.
Right.
All of them was notorious, but their members were only a reflection of them.
Of them, yeah.
Yeah.
And so when I look at that, I see those individuals being a reflection, and they were all young, from 24 to 32, and like they were from the same neighborhood, and they rode up in a neighborhood and they just beat somebody up because he was from another neighborhood. That's what we did. That's what I saw. Mm-hmm. And so until we correct the gang leaders, the gang members are going to continue to put out that same energy that the gang leader taught them to put out.
And you worded that exactly right, gang members. Because when I saw that, I thought the same thing. I felt the exact same way. And the sad part about it is, it's kind of like, we've seen so much police brutality, and we've seen so many people comply still, and the same thing happens. So how do we know when just surrendering is going to be enough? How do we know that our life is not, in jeopardy? And that's the sad part, because people out here, black folks, brown folks, we've developed a form of PTSD because we get nervous when we have any kind of police encounters. So we've seen the simplest of encounters turn into something deadly. So we don't know. We don't know.
I know, and that's kind of one of the things that I know that in the Stop and Frisk Academy.
Yeah.
And sometimes you hear the comment of just like, what, I heard one person say, what you gonna do? Treat them, teach them how to comply, to lie down or not to do anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the reality of it is, you know, it's a fight that you're not going to win.
Yeah.
Correct.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's
I
true.
mean, even if you say, you got two things you can do in a situation like that. You can try to comply the best that you possibly can, and we talked about the issues, right? Or you can fight back. And if you fight back, you're not going to win
Right.
on the street. You cannot have court on the street. And then, you know, I would love to say it. It sounds real cool. It sounds real hard. Sounds real sexy. But it's not. You got 5 officers, and if he would have fought back, it would have just justified everything that they did.
Yeah. But he
You
did
see what I
it.
mean?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, even to the extent where, you know, it's just like I'm still, you know, kind of, you know, taken back by the fact that when they approached him and they, you know, went to the driver's side and just snatched him out of the car.
Yeah.
But still, I don't even
Yeah,
know
for a
why he
moving
did
violation.
that.
Yeah, that-
Exactly.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For something
Yeah.
like that. And they got him down, and then, you know, I mean, if he would have, again, what do you do?
Yeah.
You see
Well,
what I'm saying?
Counselor,
When he said,
let me interject something, though, because I think there's a rhetoric. I was in a discussion with one of the vice chancellors with the University of Alabama yesterday about this, and they were going to have a discussion about it this week. But one thing I'd like everybody to consider doing, like I would imagine here in Metro Nashville today, there were probably in excess of 250 people or better that were arrested or had contact with police and taken into custody. If most people look at their jurisdictions and where they live and then just go online and look at the overall stats, there are hundreds of thousands of police interactions every day where people are incarcerated, picked up, arrested for domestic or whatever it is, and there are no incidents that occur. And that's just the honest God truth. Now, what we do see is when we have these, they get on the front page, and we look at those, and then we start to get this narrative that every confrontation with law enforcement is like this. But nothing could be farther from the truth. And as I was talking to this vice chancellor, I said, you know, I heard you tell me that you have no trust in law enforcement or the policemen that are in your area to police what you're doing. I said, but do this for me. This week, go to your local jurisdiction and pull up the stats of the number of people that have been arrested and booked and released. And I think you get to see the clear picture that overall there are a number of people out there doing the job every day without any issues and anything like this taking place. And so what we have to do is work on the true narrative that takes place across the nation when it relates to law enforcement and the relationship that they have. And also address wholeheartedly any of these situations that we see like this, from the judicial standpoint, make sure they're prosecuted, but also going back and making sure changes, like you had mentioned, in supervision, holding supervisors accountable, and also with training, and making sure that they understand how to de-escalate. Because, see, there was no reason, like you just mentioned, for they even to consider getting him out of the car, because we're talking about a moving violation.
Yeah.
And even though the arrest may be warranted, at that point, that's when you establish that. But the only thing you need to establish when you walked up to the car is his identity, and then took the call further from that point, because it's a moving violation.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is when you have young people, and like you mentioned, Counselor, these people that are not that tenured in the business, and you have that gang mentality, then you go, oh, you disrespected the blue. And then that's when you start having this problem.
Yeah.
Because when I was a training officer, I would tell those officers in training, if a person runs from you, that's their prerogative. You know, we turn the lights on. By law, they're supposed to stop, but apparently they violated the law when we're trying to stop them. So do we expect them always to pull over?
right.
No.
Yeah.
And if they don't, until they do, then we establish the situation that we're dealing with based on what we see. If they get out shooting, then you understand the use of force. If they get out swinging, then you understand the use of force. If they're sitting in their car, then you treat them just as if it's a normal traffic stop.
Yeah.
No matter how far you had to chase them, no matter what you did, that's how you handle it. And I think until we have the training where officers understand about de-escalation and not going through these repetitive things, give me your hands, give me your hands, give me your hands, give me your hands.
Right.
No, have dialogue. Because when he said, whoa, y'all doing too much, some of the officers should have said, well, hold on a minute.
Right.
This is what's going on. But they don't do that
Yeah.
because they have not had the appropriate training for de-escalation of a situation.
Yeah.
And so I'm just hoping that, one, the rank and file will not lose officers due to this, because they need credible, competent, and seasoned officers to be able to train others to be able to say, hey, moving violation, you have the car, let the gentleman go. He can have his Cheerios or whatever he's going to eat tonight. We'll deal with it later.
Yeah, and I think that, when I look back at it, I think that there was probably some good dudes out there, some good officers out there. But the thing about it is they just didn't want to walk back into the station with their partners knowing that they didn't get their hands dirty or get involved. They didn't want to be talked about. That's how things naturally go. You either get in with us or you're not with us. So if somebody just stood back and didn't get themselves involved, by the time you got back to the station, they're gonna talk to you like a dog. Why you didn't get your hands dirty too? Why you didn't help out? Why you didn't do that? And I think a lot of them was upset that he ran, and they had to run. And you see, all of them was out of breath afterwards, and that brought about some anger. But I'm gonna tell you what, really, I'm not really for like a lot of the protesting and stuff like that, But I think what trips me out is this, is that we seen the Rodney King, we seen the George Floyd. Why wasn't the same energy that was put out to those cases put out for this case?
I mean, as far as like people being upset and
being upset and people being protested. Like I say, I'm not really for it, but why wasn't the same energy put out?
Well, I think it was the expediency of the prosecution of the officers. I think it was one of those things where a lot of times in those situations, we sit at home and we see that with our own eyes, and you're going, oh, wait a minute, this is a moment where there's no question about what we're dealing with because we see it. So get on with the program. We don't need suspension with pay. We don't need time off till we can assess this. And I will commend the Memphis Police Department for saying, let's get TBI involved because they're an outside entity. They can look at it realistically. They have no dog in this hunt other than to bring justice. And once the things were identified where they could prosecute, they went ahead and prosecuted. And I think because of that, that's one reason everybody in the family and everybody said, okay, there's a mistake done, but you're doing what you need to do to correct the mistake. Now, as Attorney Ali said, let's go a little further. Let's make sure our supervisors are held accountable. Let's make sure we do the training. Let's make sure they have de-escalation training. Let's also make sure we educate the general public on exactly what we're dealing with. And like I said, if your listeners are listening, you get an opportunity to go online in your local jurisdiction and look up how many people have been incarcerated or arrested even in 24, 48, or the 7-day cycle. And then you look at those numbers and go, wait a minute, how many of these type cases did I see in these? And you will be really amazed at the job that a number of women and men do every day to keep our streets safe and keep us from being mugged or robbed or being able to go to and from our homes safely and our children. And it's something that we can only do as a community. That's what cops stand for, Citizens on Patrol. And so that's one way we can do this, as Ali mentioned earlier, is that, we have to get to know one another in order to be able to have favor with one another. If I have favor for you and you have favor for me, we'll never abuse each other.
Yeah, I think that sometimes, I think where the problem lies is that as far as when you talk about the officers who do what they're supposed to as opposed to the officers who don't, is it's will that ever change? Will it always be a situation where the bad, they say one bad apple spoils the whole bunch?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's always going to continuously be an issue that we're going to deal with.
Linda, where no listener is ever left behind.
You're listening to an encore presentation of this program, KCAA